The leash snapped tight, leather straining against the metal clasp, as the German shepherd launched himself against the chain-link fence. His bark wasn't just a noise, it was a weapon, a deep, guttural thunder that shook the ribs of anyone standing too close. The man in the Italian suit recoiled, stumbling back into his wife, who dropped her designer purse on the pristine concrete of the shelter floor. "He's a monster!" the man shouted, his face flushing a mix of embarrassment and fear. "We asked for a protection dog, not a wild animal. Look at him. He's uncontrollable." The shelter volunteer, a young girl who looked like she'd never seen a day of hardship, stammered an apology. I stood in the corner, leaning against a mop bucket, my gray janitor's uniform blending into the shadows. They didn't see me. They never really do. But I saw the dog. I didn't see a monster. I saw a soldier who had been left behind. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I shifted my weight, feeling the familiar ache in my left knee, the souvenir from a mortar blast outside of Khe Sanh some 50 years ago. This facility didn't look like the Pound. It looked like a country club for canines. Polished floors, climate control, acoustic tiling to dampen the sound of lonely howls. I come here to clean the floors 3 times a week to supplement my pension, which never seems to stretch quite far enough to cover the heating bill in winter. The couple, the Van Dorns, I think the manager called them, stood there dusting off their expensive clothes, looking at the shepherd with absolute disdain. They smelled of expensive cologne and old money, that specific scent of people who have never had to fight for a meal or a breath of air. It's a smell that coats the back of your throat. I looked down at my own hands, calloused and dark, the skin map-like with wrinkles and scars. I've held rifles. I've held brothers as they bled out, and I've held the leashes of beasts that could tear a tank tread apart. Standing there, invisible to the millionaires, I felt a heavy stone settle in my gut. They looked at that dog and saw a problem to be discarded. I looked at him, ears pinned back, eyes darting, muscles vibrating with anxiety, and I felt a kinship that only the broken can understand. The sound of the dog's nails scrabbling against the concrete floor triggered it. It was a specific frequency, a desperate scratching sound that cut through the ambient noise of the shelter. Suddenly, the sterile smell of bleach and lavender cleanser vanished. Instead, my nostrils filled with the thick, suffocating scent of wet rot, burning diesel, and the metallic tang of dried blood. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim into the heavy green twilight of the canopy. The air conditioning chill was replaced by a humid heat so oppressive it felt like a wet wool blanket draped over your face. I wasn't holding a mop handle anymore. I was gripping the leather lead of a Belgian Malinois named Duke. The year was 1969. The location was the Aishau Valley. I closed my eyes for a split second and the luxury shelter dissolved. I was back in the mud, back in the place where I learned that hierarchy isn't determined by the rank on your collar or the money in your bank account, but by the content of your spirit when the bullets start flying. We were operating out of a fire support base that was little more than a red clay scar cut into the jungle. I was a specialist, a dog handler attached to a recon unit. My job was simple on paper but complicated in reality. Walk point, trust the dog, and keep the squad from walking into an ambush. Duke was 80 pounds of muscle and instinct. He didn't like many people, but he tolerated me. We had a rhythm. We slept in the same hole, ate the same rations, and drank the same lukewarm water treated with iodine. The unit was a mixed bag, mostly drafted kids from the Midwest and the South, terrified and trying to act tough. We had a tenuous peace, the kind forged by shared misery. We were all green and brown in the mud. But the world outside the wire, the world of Alabama, Mississippi, and Detroit, had a way of bleeding into the war. Even in the Valley of Death, America brought her ghosts with her. The trouble started when Lieutenant Miller took command of the platoon. He was fresh out of OCS, a college boy with a patrician nose and a voice that sounded like he was ordering a martini at a yacht club. He took one look at me, a black man from the projects of Chicago holding the leash of a high-value military asset, and sneered. It wasn't the overt, screaming racism of the KKK. It was the quiet, insidious kind. The kind that smiles politely while denying your humanity. "Specialist?" he said on his first inspection, tapping his baton against his leg. "I've read the reports on these dogs. They require a firm, intellectual hand. Are you sure you're equipped for the complexity of this animal?" He didn't use a slur. He didn't have to. The implication hung in the humid air between us like smoke. He was questioning my intelligence, my capability, my very right to be the one holding the leash. I tightened my grip on Duke, who let out a low growl, sensing my tension. "The dog listens to me, sir," I said, keeping my voice flat. "That's all that matters." Miller just smirked, a cold, dead expression. "We'll see," he said. "I don't like wild variables in my platoon." Over the next few weeks, the tension ratcheted up. Miller rode me hard. He assigned me the worst details when we weren't on patrol. He questioned every read I gave on the dog's behavior. If Duke alerted to a tripwire, Miller would hesitate, double-checking the map as if my word, and the dog's nose, weren't enough. It was exhausting. Fighting the enemy was one thing. Fighting your own commanding officer for a shred of respect was another. The other guys in the squad saw it, but they kept their heads down. You don't cross an officer in the field unless you want to end up on permanent latrine duty or walking point without cover. I swallowed the anger. I swallowed the pride. I focused on Duke. We communicated in a language without words. A twitch of the ear, a shift in stance, a subtle hand signal. Miller couldn't touch that. He couldn't regulate a bond he couldn't understand. He saw a black man and a beast. He didn't see the sophisticated biological radar system we actually were. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, days lost meaning in the bush, when the silence fell. We were 3 clicks outside the wire, moving through a section of jungle that felt wrong. The birds had stopped singing. The insects, usually a deafening chorus, had gone mute. It's a silence that screams. Duke stopped dead in his tracks. His hackles rose, a ridge of fur standing up along his spine like a saw blade. He didn't bark. Trained war dogs don't bark on patrol. He just pointed, his nose aimed toward a dense thicket of bamboo to our 1 o'clock. I raised my hand, signaling a halt. "Duke's on something?" I whispered to the radio man. Miller came up the line, pushing past the vegetation, his face red with heat and impatience. "Why have we stopped, Specialist?" he hissed. "Duke has a scent," I said, not taking my eyes off the bamboo. "Ambush likely. We need to flank left." Miller looked at the bamboo, then at me, then at the dog. He wiped sweat from his eyes. "I see nothing. The map shows a clear trail ahead. We are behind schedule. Move out." He barely finished the sentence when the world exploded. It wasn't just one sound. It was a cacophony of violence. The crack of AK-47s, the thud of grenades, the screaming of men. The bamboo thicket erupted in muzzle flashes. We had walked right into the kill zone of an L-shaped ambush, exactly what Duke had tried to warn us about. I hit the dirt, dragging Duke with me as tracers zipped through the space where my head had been a second before. "Contact front! Contact right!" someone screamed. The air turned into a slurry of dirt and shredded leaves. Chaos reigned. I looked for Miller. He was frozen. He was kneeling behind a fallen log, eyes wide, mouth open, the radio handset dangling from his grip. The intellectual hand had paralyzed him. The reality of war had shattered his theories. We were dying, and the man in charge was a statue. I didn't think. I just acted. It's a strange thing about combat. The fear is there, but it gets shoved into a box in the back of your mind, and training takes the wheel. "Suppressive fire! Left flank! Lay it down!" I roared, my voice cracking over the din. The men, desperate for direction, obeyed. They didn't care who was yelling. They just wanted to survive. I tapped Duke on the shoulder and pointed toward a depression in the ground that offered better cover, closer to the enemy line. "Voran!" I shouted, the German command for "go forward." Duke launched himself like a missile. We bounded forward, moving from cover to cover. I laid down fire with my M16, covering the squad as they shifted. I wasn't a grunt anymore. I wasn't the janitor. I was the conductor of this orchestra of violence. We managed to break the L shape, turning the enemy's flank against them. My chest was heaving as I reloaded. I looked back and saw Miller. He had taken a hit. He was lying in the open, clutching his thigh, blood darker than the mud pooling around him. He was screaming, a high-pitched, terrified sound that cut through the gunfire. He was in the kill zone. The NVA machine gunner had him pinned. If nobody moved, he was dead in 30 seconds. I looked at Duke. The dog was panting, blood on his muzzle from a scratch, but ready. I looked at Miller. This was the man who had treated me like I was subhuman. The man who had ignored the warning that got my friends killed. The man who looked at me with disgust because of the color of my skin. A dark, cold thought crossed my mind. Let him die. It would be easy. Nobody would know. It was war. Casualties happen. The mortar rounds were walking closer, shaking the ground like a fist on a table. Miller's eyes met mine across the clearing. The arrogance was gone. The superiority was gone. All that was left was a terrified boy realizing he was about to die alone in a foreign land. I spat into the dirt. I am not him. That's the difference. I don't determine worth based on prejudice. I determine it based on duty. I slapped my leg. "Duke, Deckung?" "Cover." The dog understood. I popped smoke, purple smoke, thick and cloying, and we moved. I sprinted into the open, bullets snapping past my ears like angry hornets. I grabbed Miller by his webbing, hoisting him up. "Get up!" I screamed in his face. "Move your ass, Lieutenant!" He was heavy, dead weight with shock. I dragged him, his boots carving furrows in the mud. Duke was right beside us, snarling, snapping at the jungle, acting as a psychological shield. We dove behind the root system of a massive banyan tree just as a grenade went off where Miller had been lying. I checked his wound, arterial bleed.